Welcome to the Filipino American Women Project, a podcast show that shares stories and life lessons told by individuals living or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a fellow Filipino American woman, and I'm excited for you to join us. Let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Jen Amos here with the Filipino American Women Project podcast show. And as always, I am with my incredible co-host, Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Hey, everybody.
Yes, and we are excited. I feel like I say this all the time, but it's true. We're always excited when we do this show because it means we get to interview another incredible woman in the Filipino American community. So I want to introduce you all to Roanne de Guia-Samuels. Roanne is the lead mental health clinician for Filipino Outreach Project for a county in California with the highest Filipino American population per capita and the fifth most diverse in the States. She has a private practice in California and also provides online therapy overseas with a special interest in supporting Filipino women and her family. Roanne blogs about parenting, mental health, relationships, and family around the context of the Filipino culture. She likes to show up in social media with deep intention to spread kindness through empathy and clarity. She loves spending time with her children and her husband, which is her soulmate. And fun fact about her, she created an ebook called the 5 Pinoy Love Languages, which is actually free on her website and available for you today. So Filipina Psychotherapist, educator, one lucky mama and wife, Roanne de Guia-Samuels. Roanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jen and Nani. Thank you for that warm welcome. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, it's an absolute pleasure having you on today. Offline, I was already telling you how impressed and in awe that I am with what you're doing and how your practice is focused on Filipino women specifically. And so I feel like this is an obvious question for me to ask you, but why don't we start with you sharing, how did you hear about the project and why did you want to be on our show today?
So I got a love message from Nani. Nani is a sweetheart from IG. And so she connected with me, shared with me what the podcast is about. And I'm really excited to be here because I love, like I mentioned before we started our recording, eavesdropping, especially listening to the stories of Filipino women, because we are very similar but also very different. And so one time Nani and I were texting, I was actually telling her I am listening to your podcast while I'm actually cooking dinner for the fam. So yeah, very honor. It's such an honor to share this space with you both. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you
for coming.
Yeah. And thank you to Nani as well for reaching out to you, Roanne. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm just excited to get into some of the topics we're going to talk about today. So, Roanne, for people that are getting to know you for the first time, this show is really dedicated for individuals who live or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female or she, her. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about your family background and why you identify as a Filipino American woman.
Yeah, I actually have been in the States. I was born and raised in the Philippines, and I have been in the States for about 17 years. I came here when I was 23 years old permanently. And I say that, I know this might sound a little bit confusing, but when I was 11, we started the immigration process. As you know, many of our immigrant families bring their families in chunks. And so my mom actually took me and my sister to live with a relative. She literally shipped us. And she left after 2 weeks. And that was actually my first time in the States when I was 11. And the hope was that she'll bring the family in chunks and then we'll all be here together. So I only stayed here for about a year and a half. So there was some challenge there. I lived with a relative who was so, open to helping us adjust here. It's my grandma. She was so considerate because she also lived with my aunt. She was so considerate. She was very rigid with her rules. And so that was not the primary reason why we actually returned back home, but there was a lot of other challenges as well. So we actually came back after like a year and a half. And then I finished all my schooling back home, most of my schooling, and then came back here when I was 23. And I had this hybrid experience when I was younger in middle school, where I was that Filipino American, and I had a very well-meaning but very traditional, through my grandma, style of parenting. So I had that experience, and then I became the immigrant because my mom never really stayed here with me, and having to really adjust and, build my life here in America when I turned 23. So I've been here in the States for 17 years. So yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, your grandma was essentially your primary caretaker when you were here or when you moved here?
Yes, my grandma actually lived with my aunt, but she had her own family. But my grandma became my primary caretaker, and I was 11, and then my sister was like 9. Yeah, so she took care of us, and she was loving, but also very, rigid with her parenting style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Do you appreciate, or have you appreciated the way that she had raised you, looking back?
Yes, it actually gave me a window to understand my mom even better, because I think I hear a lot of stories about, what's interesting is I was born and raised in the Philippines, right? I'm thinking when I immigrated in the States that my Filipino American peers would have a slightly different story as far as like the way they were parented. But interestingly, their mother simply sounds like my mom. And why would they be different, right? It doesn't mean that uproot a plant and bring it somewhere else that it'll look different. The leaves are the same. And so the experience is similar, but the place is different. So I do have that experience of, the way the traditional Filipino parenting, and the having been with my grandma allowed me to really fully understand my mom's story, so that I could understand her, and understanding her led me to understanding myself. Yeah.
I'm actually kind of a little fascinated about your relationships with your grandma and your mother, considering how, your practice focuses particularly on Filipino women. Do you feel like your grandma and mom were a big influence into why you focus on Filipino women today?
Certainly, directly and indirectly. I saw my mom is like, she's very inspiring. I see her, even though I might say she's quite traditional with her Filipino parenting, she seemed very progressive in many other ways. She's a single mom. She actually raised 5 kids and had a business on her own. So, quote and unquote, like strong woman, and I aspire to be her. She's very generous. They truly inspire me because also my hybrid experience. I feel that I got a little experience of the Filipino American when I was younger, and then still very rooted in my island culture and trying to bridge that. And I hear in a lot of spaces that that's a conflict between our Filipino American community is trying to bridge the gap. And in my small ways, really, I'm very passionate about thinking of ways to bridge that gap, but in a very practical language, palatable to the Filipino ears, if you will. Really very intentional and encapsulated in kindness and compassion. That's actually my goal.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah.
I want to check in with Nani real quick. Nani, have any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, no questions just yet, but I just want to, Roanne and I have talked a lot, I feel like, in the last few months, and I've done a lot of reading on her blog, which I love. And I think that you do a really amazing job at explaining that kind of, that bridge or that gray area where it really takes our deepest understanding of, why our mother parented us the way that they did when we were younger, or grandma or whoever, to be able to appreciate it and then incorporate that into your own parenting style. And I think that you do that in a way that's really culturally congruent, in a way that people can really understand. So I just want to thank you for everything that you've published so far. I really enjoy reading your writing.
Oh, thank you both. Yeah, I do really get the sense that you both are so genuinely interested in learning more about the culture and therefore about yourself. So thank you for allowing us the space to share our stories.
Yeah, it's our absolute pleasure. And for myself, I feel like I'm in a safe place now in my life where I can learn about my culture. And I find that the safest and most comfortable way for me to do it is through these conversations. And so, back then it was a little more difficult. I have mentioned this in like past shows. What do you call it? I grew up with an abusive upbringing within my own family, and I had kind of associated Filipino culture as abuse. And I thought, if I want to get close to it, if I want to be even associated with it, I'm asking myself to get hurt. I'm asking to get hurt. And so fortunately, years later, I've come to a place where it's like, you know what, like I'm going to be Filipino no matter what. So I'm going to have to make this work somehow. And I'm going to have to figure out how to do it my way. And fortunately, with this podcast that I have the fortune of doing with Nani, it's been a very transformative experience, even for me. I usually come on the show just, like bright-eyed and just open and ready to learn from the people that are going to join us, because it's been nothing but a safe environment so far. Nani, I feel like you would agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It feels like another family outside of my family.
Oh, yeah. And I've heard your story, Jen, and really sharing the history of abuse. I'm going to drop Mary Ann, the Filipino moms.
Yes.
You guys have interviewed her in the past, and she actually have interviewed me because she said she doesn't know a lot of Filipina therapists. And she was praising me for my work, when in fact I feel that the praise belongs to her, because she's out there and, like, similar to Jen, sharing the story. For me, when we talk about mental health, it's nice to have Filipino therapists. That's very important, like one who really understands culture. But to have people raise their hand and say, like, I have a story to tell, to me, that's even more commendable. That really is the one that changes the trajectory of what it truly means to be strong. And I just want to say that even though I'm like sharing culture, I am actually a student of our culture. So I'm more of a student as much as I am a teacher. That's how I see myself. Yeah.
I love it. You're very humble, Roanne. I just thought you should know that. I love it. I feel very like safe around you and like not intimidated by your profession and everything that you're doing just because of the way you're talking to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I, didn't become your standard like doctor, or I didn't take on like a stable job as my family would have hoped for. So I think that I've kind of grown this respect, but also feeling of intimidation by people who have actually like gone through school for a really long time to get into the field that they're in. But when I talk to you, I just feel like, I just love how you say, I'm a student. Like, I'm a student of our culture. I'm a student of our community. And it makes me feel valid, where I feel like sometimes people would hold that title as if that's like, as if it's on a pedestal, above someone else. So I just thought I should acknowledge that. And I think I'm also, what do you call it? What's the word? Like, just, you make me feel safe too when you talk about like, oh, like just like with Marianne, and how you feel like it's more like admirable for someone to share their story. It's like, oh, that's cool. So if I'm just myself, like that's enough. If I'm just telling my story, like that's enough. So thank you for validating that.
Oh, yeah. Really, when people think I'm doing a good job, or like, really for me, a reflection more of them than me. That's how I see it. Like if you're able to point out something positive, really you're hoping that your ability to also use self-praise on yourself and to actually get it out of your mouth to praise someone else is really a reflection of you. That's how I I see it. Although sometimes it's easier to maybe praise someone else before we find self-praise on our own stuff. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for the acknowledgement. Thank you, Jen and Nanny.
Yes, we're just sharing love all around on this call today.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier about reading your blog, like that tone that Jen is kind of sensing talking to you now for the first time is also very apparent in your writing. It's very present in your writing, even when we're just DMing back and forth. You have that effect on people, I think. So you're in the right profession.
Yeah, I'm the lucky one. I feel to be in alignment with, my profession and what I really want to do. And I get paid for doing it. It's just magical. Yeah, it's magical.
Love it. Well, since we're already talking about it, let's fast forward to your life today, Roanne. And I'd love for you to share what keeps you busy and most excited about life nowadays. Like, I know you have your practice, you have a book, and you're on social media. So why don't we talk about all of those things? All right. Jen Amos here, jumping into the middle of our show, as I always do, to remind you why this show is possible. So, at the end of every episode, I tend to say, if you didn't catch our guest contact info, don't worry, we'll have those in the show notes. Check them out. I worked so hard on them. You're welcome. Well, it's been brought to my attention that our show notes are not as easy to find as I thought, which is why starting summer 2020, the Filipino American Women Project is proud to be partnering with Captivate, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. Captivate is created for independent podcasters, designed from day one to help you to focus on audience growth and the expansion of your audio influence. One way that Captivate makes our lives easier as independent podcasters is by taking the guesswork out of making a website for your show. That's right, a website for your show. So listeners, starting summer 2020, finding our show notes will be so much easier. All thanks to Captivate. You're welcome, as always. If you're about to start podcasting or are getting burnt out from all the extra work of producing one, like building a website, consider a 7-day free trial, that's right, free, with Captivate by visiting thefil-am-woman.com. That's the Fil-Am, short for Filipino American Woman.com. Or, check out our show notes in the meantime, which is in the details section of each episode. Once again, you can visit thefil-am-woman.com or visit the details section of this episode.
And then I'm a mom, so that keeps me busy.
Yes.
You know what I love is waking up in the morning and not rushing and, saying good morning to my kids and actually really noticing them. Like I have this practice where my eyes lit up when I see my children. And so they know this practice, even though it's not like a rigid practice. It's just the way things have been, where when I don't see them, maybe I was doing something else and they wake up in the morning, they'll tug my clothes, my nightgown. They're like, "Mommy, I'm awake," waiting for the spark in my eyes to show up, which it never fails. I always have that reserved for my kids. So my kids keep me busy and inspire me. So currently, I am actually in Solano County. You guys familiar with Vallejo? That's my hood.
I am, yes. Yes, that's my hood too.
Yes. Cool. Seafood City is our grocery store.
Yes.
I don't know if they have that in the East Coast, but my work there keeps me, I don't know, right? Maybe they have something else.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. Do they?
Yeah.
I don't know, at least not in Virginia, am I aware, but I remember because I lived in San Diego for 20 years and we had Seafood City there, but
definitely there,
in California.
Yeah.
So that keeps me busy. I think Nanny blogs, or Jen, do you blog?
Yeah, Nani's the blogger right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Blogging takes a lot of time, doesn't it? Like, Nanny, I don't know your experience, but for me to create something, it takes So that keeps me busy.
Constantly taking notes, so I know.
Right. I'm the same way. I always have notebooks everywhere. So I'm always taking notes. Trying to, Yeah. So creating content, I actually have this workbook. I'm still trying to complete it. It's called Pakiramdam, which means feelings. It's a feelings workbook for Filipino families, and it's free. It's going to be in our Happiness Tools library on our website, but it basically teaches parents and the child to connect with each other by talking about feelings. Yeah, so I love creating content, so blogging and content that, like if you were looking at a picture, the content makes you tilt your head in a different way so that, oh, I never saw that photo or that picture in that way before. And so allows you to explore it in a different vantage point. So I love creating content for that purpose. So that keeps me busy. You mentioned I also have a private practice, and I primarily see Filipino women and couples. So I have, as we're recording, I'm actually in my garden studio. So I have a garden studio therapy room. So that keeps me busy. I also do presentations. So I design presentations. Because I'm a clinician within the county, and I'm the clinician for the Filipino Project there, I do presentations to help non-Filipino clinicians to sort of like understand the Filipino culture. So yeah, that keeps me busy being a wife, a mom, creating content, private practice. Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah. How did you come up with the garden as a form of therapy?
Actually, so it's located in the back of my house. And I created this hub, and it's separate from my home, and the entrance is separate. Part of the work is in the county, is reducing, stigma, which means the definition of what strong actually means in our culture. Before I was faced with, because the discipline of therapy teaches you to have like boundaries. And I thought, you know what, I'm part of this movement to reduce stigma. And the separation between client and therapist, it doesn't have to be so wide. Especially, I'm serving my community, my Filipino women and her families. I believe I was questioning myself before, am I really reducing the stigma? And me challenging myself as a clinician, I thought I will bring it closer to home. It's still very separate. Like, because protecting my client's confidentiality is serious business to me. So it's separate, but it's really close to home, if you will. I wanted to give a space where it's not sterile. Therapy just feels like going to visit a friend type of thing. And so I took it seriously by bringing it close to home. Yeah.
Wow. I think that's beautiful. I mean, I've only gone to less than a handful of therapy sessions myself earlier this year, but I definitely felt that separation between my therapist and I, that distance. And it was partly why I just didn't want to go back. I still plan on exploring it again, but I'm not in a rush because doing a podcast show like this is very therapeutic for me. And I get to share my stuff on here. So it's like, oh, okay, well, if I'm already like talking to people and they're giving me feedback, that's kind of good therapy for me. But I just love the whole idea. This just kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier of how humble and considerate and compassionate you are to go out of your way to create this garden so that when your clients see you, it's not like a client, therapist. It's not like what you typically think of when you go see your therapist. It's like going to meet a friend, like you said. And I just think that's really awesome. I want to like visit your garden now.
I'll take photos. Still,
we all have a garden room.
Yeah, you can, because Nanny's from, just around here. So I'm still creating it, building it some more, but I'll take photos and maybe I can post it on Instagram, share that. But I love the space. Even for me, my practice is really like I hone everything and tailor everything with the Filipino woman in mind. So even the traditional therapy of talk therapy, not that I obviously don't do that because, we have to talk about things. That's very healing as well. But I infuse different, techniques, thinking of the Filipino woman, Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. So, Roanne, you were talking about how you made this book, Feelings for Filipino Families. And I want to share a little bit about my background. My mom, she became a single parent when I was 10 years old. We unexpectedly had lost my dad. And I feel like my mom, she was emotionally neglectful from my perspective, and I understand now why she was that way, because she had to raise, 3 kids under 11 on her own. But even till this day, we have a pretty good relationship now. I feel like I can kind of just speak my mind around her or whatever. But when it comes to talking about feelings, I feel like my mom's very task oriented. Her love language, if we're talking about love language, she's acts of service. She's not necessarily, what do you call it? My mother-in-law described it this way. There's 2 types of people in the world. There are pointers and there are painters. So painters are like people who are narrative, who can really articulate like what they're saying. They can like draw like a descriptive, beautifully visual picture, where a pointer is kind of like you're just kind of pointing your brush, someone that's very direct and to the point. So my mom is what I consider a pointer. She's just very to the point, very blunt. She'll say anything like on her mind. That's just, there's no, what do you call it? She doesn't like flower. Yeah, she doesn't filter. Yeah, thank you. So I'm just curious, like I'm a very emotional person, and she's essentially the opposite. How do you bridge that gap? How do you start that conversation? Like for me, how would I start that conversation with my mom to talk about feelings? Does that make sense?
Okay, now I'm stumped.
Yeah. And a little more background. My mom, maybe this will help. Like my mom, she's an immigrant. She married my dad and he joined the Navy. And so I was born, in Japan on American soil as an American. So, I'm very Americanized. I'm quite outspoken. And my mom, she's, really reserved, and kind of what I describe often can really fill in that Maria Clara archetype of, being the matriarch of the family and being supportive and putting other people first, So if I try to talk to her and ask her what she wants to do, like, what do you like? What do you like? Well, how do you feel? It's a very hard conversation to have, because I just feel like she doesn't think that way. I think she's always first to think about the family first, then to think about herself. And so how do does that make sense so far? Like, Nani, am I making sense?
No, you make sense.
Rather than giving a prescription of diet, I think to put like context, like what I mentioned about me having this window of having this experience with my grandma, and it helped me explain my interaction with my mom. I know that we're gonna maybe talk briefly about the Filipino love languages, but one of the things that might be helpful is to really learn that we were equipped differently, or like say in the Philippines, right? Here, when you send children to school, when somebody cries, you say, you ask about their feelings, like, you notice you're crying, somebody hit you, how does that make you feel? That type of language, and something that is what we're used to here. But in the Philippines, in the islands, we don't really talk about these things. We don't ask our children, or not used to asking our children, how are you feeling today? The demonstration of love is very different. And so bridging those is really understanding. May I share? I love Moana, right?
Yes.
May I use that as a reference? I love this movie. But anyway, the father kept telling, the father kept telling Moana, do not go past the reef, right? Because the father has already built this island that already is the greener pasture island. And why would you want to explore, right? Stay here. It's safe. And maybe I'm not answering your communication, but just I'm using it as a reference. And so Moana continued to explore, but she had this quest of really trying to understand. So she learned the history, right? Oh, that's why they don't traverse the ocean anymore, or didn't want me to go past the reef because of the history, the danger, the perils out there. And so knowledge of the history gives us understanding, and with understanding, we can provide kindness in that interaction. And it goes both ways, not just let's say in your example, your mom, you just understanding your mom. Am I making sense here? Maybe we need to scratch that.
I hear you. Essentially, part of what I'm sharing, it's not because I'm speaking out of like angst or resentment with my mom in any way. It's because I had learned her history. I learned when I learned about her upbringing and learned what she went through and understood the sacrifices she had to make, especially after we lost my dad. I was able to realize, like, my mom was already doing so much for me. And the fact that I was placing this one expectation of her to like ask me about my feelings was completely selfish of me because she was already doing so much. And I didn't want to look at that because I wanted her to ask me how I was feeling, And so when I have that context, it's like, okay, like my mom did her part and I'm going to do my part now by, trying to seek out like that, if I do need to talk about my feelings, it's okay if it's not with her because she's already done so many things. I just need to find my own outlet for that, And I feel like that's what I'm getting from what you're saying is like, if we know why Moana's dad, the reason why he acted that way is because of his own history. He was traumatized, not to spoil the movie for anyone. So I won't get too much into details, but there's a reason why, he didn't want to go like past the reef. So I that's what I'm getting from what you're saying. And it answers my question.
Yeah. And I didn't want to give a prescription that a dialogue that a listener might use. And then because we don't have enough information about them and they're like, oh, that didn't work out. So I was trying to be responsible with my response, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to use stories instead. And then one of the things really that's a difference in just making sure, in the islands, there's a lot of other teachers. So for instance, we might use, let's say a mom might use silent treatment because she's upset. She might actually commission an auntie, a tita friend to talk to, let's say, the teen. And she actually feeds that information to the third person so that she doesn't have to directly tell that child what she needs. I know it sounds so complicated, but instead, the third person would feed that information to the child so the child goes to the mother directly. It makes relationships much more complicated because we solicit that third person. In the islands, though, I see that there's some fluidity with that. And because the society sort of understands that better, not that it's good, I think we need to certainly improve with our direct communication, but it's something that the community hugs. Like, oh, your mother's just feeling this way. There's a lot of you know what? She really loves you. That's why she's doing that. What I find that in America, because the norm is to just say what you mean and mean what you say, and not one is better than the other, there's a lot of confusion, right? See, this teen is confused, like mom is just angry and it looks like she needs space. And then she gets mad when I actually don't. Now we're going to go to the first Pinoy love language, lambing, which is, you can either solicit or give affection. And so what she needed was lambing, but she's not saying it directly. Instead, in the islands, a third person would say that to the child. Oh, you know what? Do this to your mom. She really loves you. She works so hard. She was just tired, but she really loves you. Just tell her. And if she keeps ignoring you, just keep telling her, Mom, I know this happened. I'm sorry. That's not what I mean. In America, we don't have teachers, and we just leave the teen, trying to recognize these nonverbal cues. Yeah, figure out. It's so confusing. And honestly, from the shoes of one that was, rooted in the States, it's almost unfair. It's like reading a book you weren't, taught to read. So yeah, that's a pain point that I really hope to bring some clarity. And in both ways, by doing the feelings workbook that I'm talking about, it almost seems like you're teaching your child, but I'm also giving the parent a positive experience of what they would get if the child expressed their feelings to them. And in fact, why it's different, it's really for the Filipino women, is because there's even a page there where the mom, or if you're an auntie, shares their feelings. So it's not just the child. So there's that connection there.
So speaking of love languages, Roanne, why don't we just dive into it and talk about the other 4 love languages? What's the next one that you want to share with us today?
Hey everyone, Jen Amos here, taking a quick break in between our interviews, as I always do, to actually talk about a new resource that I have personally been using for a couple of weeks now called 7 Cups. I want to give a shout out to Asia Hilario, who shared this resource in episode 29. So check it out. We live in a world where you can be surrounded by people, but still feel lonely, with nobody to turn to when things get rough. But being heard is an important part of being human. Psychologist Glenn Mariotti, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, saw that there was great power in listening, but he knew not everyone had someone to talk to. He started to wonder, how can I make being heard a reality for everyone? And that's why 7 Cups was born. Thanks to thousands of volunteer listeners, including myself, stepping up to lend a friendly ear, 7 Cups is happy to say, we're here for you. No matter who you are or what you're going through, this is a place where you'll be heard and cared for. We might be strangers on the surface, but underneath, we're just the friends you haven't met yet. 7 Cups has trained volunteer listeners available 24/7 to give emotional support over online chat. It's anonymous and, get this, completely free. When you need someone to talk to, we're here to listen and help you feel better. Learn more about 7 Cups today by visiting 7cups.com, or, as always, you can check out the show notes for the link.
Okay, so I shared lambing, but there's so many other love languages. But the second one that I have in my ebook is called applause. And so it's easily translated as just touch. But, in the Filipino culture, touch is beyond just, stroking. Like, we remember the love language of our moms, like maybe using Vicks, and then even though we don't hear them utter the words, I love you, that often, it is really the touch that they pat your head when you did a good job, and they kind of like shampoo your head. It is their way of saying, good job, I'm very proud of you, even if they have a hard time saying it. Or they put their hands on your lap. Or when you're crying, they put their hands a little longer on your back or on your shoulder, saying, I'm here. And the difficulty, or they're still learning to find the words to say, I hear you, my child. But that's one of the Pinoy love language is haplos. The third one is kiliti, which is really when you're trying to tickle someone. And there is this concept in Tagalog, and I'll say it in Tagalog, hulihin ang kiliter, which means to catch someone's fancy or what tickles them. And so sometimes because we don't, and we're talking about the more, traditional way of expressing, we might not express it through verbal communication, but we catch their kilite, what they like. So maybe it's bringing food or like cooking or, whatever catches someone's kilite or like what makes them tickled. So that's one of the Pinoy love language. And the book really talks more about that language in depth. And then pasalubong, so, something that you take with you, like sometimes we have balikbayan boxes, right? So the pasalubong, or if you were pasalubing something you take home with you, whether it's a food or whatnot. Pasalubong is a Filipino love language because it is this object permanence that even if I didn't see you, I'm working so hard, I'm a nurse, I have a couple of like shifts I have to work, the pasalubong tells you, even without you are not in my sight. I was thinking about you. And so when the parent, a nurse, comes home and they have a pasalubong, it is that object permanence that connects them. Even when I'm working hard, I was thinking about you. So that's one of the Pinoy love language. And then, because means to just utter. So in the Pinoy love language, I'm also trying to share that there is something with, just saying it, practicing, I care about you. If we cannot say, I love you, that's okay. Certainly we have been saying it in other ways with the other Pinoy love languages, but I do encourage others to say that I just care, or I see you, I hear you. So because it's just saying it, or saying what you mean. So those are the few Pinoy love languages, and I do have on the ebook the Pinoy love language solution. So if you have could not interpret your mom's lambing, they're trying to solicit, what would you do? The dialogues that you can possibly use. So I've included that in the ebook, which is free. So
beautiful.
Yeah. So those are,
Can you give a recap one more time of the 5 love languages?
Yeah. So the first one is lambing. Okay. So that's when you are soliciting or asking or giving, or it could be acting strange to get affection. And then the second one is applause, which is in the English language, just means touch. But as I break down in the ebook, it's a little bit more than that for Filipino love language. Kilite is to give this tickle feeling or catching someone's fancy or what makes them happy or tickles them. So kilite. And then pasalubong is the something you take home, whether back to the islands or from work to people that you love. And it communicates this object permanence that I was away working, but I thought I was thinking about you. And then the last one in the ebook is because. It's to simply utter, I care about you. You are needed. So those are the 5 Pinoy love languages. Yeah.
I think right now in my life, I'm the last one. I like to hear it. I like someone to tell me that I'm loved and cared for. Nani, did you think of your love language?
I think that I'm all of them still, but I do just want to say, Roanne, thank you for that breakdown, because I think that you kind of touched on a point earlier when you said or highlighted that not only is it important for us to understand why our parents parented us the way that they did, but it's also important, even if we have to get a third party involved, for them to understand how we view their actions and decisions as well, in order for the relationship to change. Because if it's just us understanding, and sorry, this is kind of going back to Jen, your question about how to communicate that with your mom. If it's just us understanding them and coming to a new place in our own minds, we can only still control our actions. So that's not going to change anything. We still can't expect for anything on their end. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Anything on their end to change if that communication doesn't go both ways. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So and then about the love languages, I think that those are also really important, all of them, to understand, because while you might identify with one, your mom or your husband or whoever it is that you're using them to communicate with might express themselves or like to receive love in a different way. And if you don't understand that, it's always going to be hard to communicate with each other. So, I appreciate you breaking that down.
Yes.
Thank you.
I definitely want to download that ebook and study it more, because that gives me a better understanding of how my family expresses love. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Yes. Well, we are at my most favorite part of the show. I mean, everything is my favorite, but we are at the final question of the show. And, really the purpose of this project is to share life lessons and stories told by Filipino American women. So, Roanne, your life lesson today is that stories can bring forth healing, but also harm. The stories we tell ourselves are the realities we pull from in any relationships we currently hold and will form. And the most powerful thing about stories is that they can be retold and re-scripted. I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit more and mainly share a story in your life that led you to this life lesson.
Especially in our Filipino culture, we're very collective. And so there's a lot of passed down stories, and that's wonderful. Sometimes we hear stories so much, we think the story belongs to us. That is our story, when in fact it's a story that belongs to someone else, but they are just sharing their story. Stories really are what is the framework we operate from. So in therapy, and it doesn't have to be in therapy, but that would be my context. Ultimately, it's really rescripting stories that fit your vision of how you want your story to be. So one of the things that I feel that can change this trajectory for us is the way we parent our children, to allow them to express, to ask them questions, to be curious about their space. And when we ask them, to not have an agenda of how they should respond, so that they in themselves would find ways to be creative, use their imagination, so they can soar and find their own voice and story. So, I mean, my story is, just learning from my own history. So I belong to a multiracial family. So we have, as you know, many Filipinos, a mixture of different ancestry. But I have a sister who's very European-looking features. And so when I was growing up, people would mention, "Oh, Roanne, she's pretty." And then my mom would say, "Wait till you see my other daughter." So I grew up with that type of narrative. But, and there's a lot of complexity around that, wanting to love your parent, but the parent that actually also unconsciously made me feel that I wasn't enough. And in my searching of wanting to continue to love my mom and see her in this light, I actually not only was so focused on my own story and hers, but learned of my grandmother's story and understood that she's actually doing so much better already from where her roots, where she came from, and having understanding and ultimately compassion for her own story led me to understand, where she was coming from, and also knowing that I can rescript my story. So that's my message, because we now have the social media platform where everybody is a storyteller. To be very intent when we share stories, because we might think and absorb that their story is ours, when we can actually recreate our own story, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think the thing that resonated with me the most is really when you said that when people are telling their stories, sometimes we take it as our own story. And for example, at Christmas, when one day my grandma was like, "Jen, why do you look so different?" And my mom says, "Oh, because she got fat." It's that story stuck with me. But looking back, I just thought, just real briefly, looking back, I thought, oh, my mom is telling, she told me the story of her standard of beauty. That wasn't about me. That was her story of what she considered beautiful, and being able to separate that and realize that she wasn't really talking about me, but her own story of her perception. I said that 3 times, but that's how I understand what you're saying.
No, yeah.
I think it's a good way to create healthy boundaries for yourself when you're listening to other people talking to you or even talking about you.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's this movement to be genuine when you're posting or blogging or whatever, and that's wonderful. But you can also be genuine and responsible at the same time. So yeah,
absolutely.
How it serves a greater purpose. Yeah. So I believe in that.
Well, Roanne, I had such an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Nani, I want to see if you had any thoughts as well for Roanne before we wrap up here.
yeah, I mean, I do just want to touch on or point out the fact that I love the way that you use your social media, and when you say you show up with the intent to spread kindness and things like that. I think that that's something more people should try to acknowledge and embrace, because I learned so much from your page, from pages like yours or like Clarice's. I have like my own folder in my notes for your guys' from things that I learned from your page. So I do really appreciate that content that you put out.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And Roanne, I'm sure at this point, people are wondering, where is she posting all this stuff? Why don't you share with our listeners how they can get a hold of you or how they can find your content online?
Yeah, on IG, I am Calamansi Juice for you. Calamansi is with a K. And then you can also check me out on my website, www.calamansi with a K again, juice.com.
Beautiful. And in case you don't know how to spell calamansi, listeners, don't worry, because I wouldn't have known how to spell it, but it'll be provided. It'll be provided in the show notes for you. So go ahead and check that out. You all know I work really hard on those show notes, so at least humor me and take a look at them. With that said, Roanne, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and just your presence and energy. I love how compassionate and empathetic and articulate you are with just this conversation today. And thank you for creating the 5 Pinoy Love Languages. I am very much looking forward to downloading that on your website so I can learn more for myself. So with that said, thank you all so much. And obviously, Nani, thank you for being my co-host as always. To our listeners, we appreciate you and we look forward to speaking with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.
Love and thank you all. Thank you, Roanne. Bye.
Maraming salamat sa uulitin, which means until next time.